Another thing, and I think is important, and I did allude to this at the September meeting, was just kind of giving you an overview of what a comprehensive plan is. It is a policy document. It's not a regulatory document. Some people think that it's, a series of mandated requirements and things like the zoning ordinance provisions or subdivision regulations, but that's not the case. Really, the land use plan is a reflection of the community's vision for where it wants to be at some future date. It's something that the community could and should reference in a variety of land use decisions that come before the town, not just the planning commission, but the board of mayor and aldermen and other boards in the town, to help guide them in making decisions which most promote the vision. Sometimes there's going to be things that come up, and we've dealt with this. There's maybe some strategies in the plan that can be contradictory at times. And that's when it's important to understand, I think, the vision of the plan so that you can apply the most appropriate policies toward realizing that vision. So the plan, is not something that's black and white. They're not intended to be that. So there's always going to be some subjectivity in a land use plan. That's just the way it is. It's a generalized document. Again, the important thing is for the public and the decision makers to have an understanding of the vision, the underlying vision, and the strategies that are in the plan to help us to realize the vision. Some basic assumptions that I provided in this outline that I think are important, at least this is from the staff's perspective. We do not feel that the plan needs to be overhauled, certainly not in terms of its overriding vision. As I mentioned earlier, we spent months formulating this plan. There's a lot of thought put into this land use plan update. I don't think it needs to be overhauled. The findings that are in the plan, the issues that Farragut faces, the 8 key strategies that are proposed to address the different findings in the plan are, from the staff's perspective, appropriate and should be promoted consistently. Thirdly, the regulatory documents that we have, the zoning ordinance, subdivision regulations, there are some elements in those that are a disconnect with certain language in our land use plan, and I do think that needs to be cleaned up. We've run into that with some rezoning requests where in the document there's maybe some contradictory language, and that makes it hard for decision makers to know which direction to go when they have something presented to them, because there's things that contradict themselves within the plan. And that does need to be addressed, but not certainly in reaction to some single proposal or single use. It needs to be thought of more comprehensively. And then certainly the staff feels that if we get to the point where we're actually changing the future land use map, that we certainly need to engage the affected property owners and make sure that they understand, they're on board with what we're trying to do, the logic of it, and that they understand the vision that we're trying to promote with that proposed modification. So with that as a very general overview, because I thought it was important to make a few of those basic points, we can go back to the start of the discussion outline, and I'd like to get your all's feedback, because in order for the staff to know what we may need to do in terms of making adjustments to the plan or some of our ordinances or both, we need to get feedback from you all on and have some clear direction. So I think I would just start by asking why we are revisiting the plan at this time. I don't know if you want to. I hate to call you out on this, but I know you mentioned that we might need a workshop on this, and I didn't know if there was some specific things you wanted to talk about with it.
I absolutely stand behind the land use plan. I think we spent, not just to regurgitate what you just said, but spent a lot of time and had a lot of public feedback and input on what the town citizens would like to see as far as the future of the town. What I do think would be important is, I think we need to clarify on what level and what degree we're going to hold the land use plan. And if it is going to be a prevailing document that is the one-all be-all to everything, then I think we need to spell that out. If it's going to be more of a guiding document, then I think we should spell that out. And I think our policies in the land use plan are good policies. I don't necessarily think they're a one-size-fit-all policy for every situation. And so I think there should be, on occasion and under certain circumstances, some flexibility that allows us, I don't use the word deviate, but allows us to use some well, combination of objectivity and subjectivity depending on the situation and what is most appropriate. Obviously having input from adjacent properties, but again, I agree with exactly what you said. This is not about one particular, even though maybe one property promulgated this discussion, I don't think necessarily we should look at it in a vacuum. We need to look at it as its entirety and how it would affect everybody. And I think consistency is the key. And there's been sometimes we've deviated from the land use plan. I'm not going to get specifically into the times, but there's been sometimes with some architecture issues that we've kind of deviated from the plan, and there's been sometimes with some vehicular connectivity issues that we've deviated from the plan. And we just need to determine. It would really be nice is that when we have scenarios that are relatively easy to interpret, it'd be nice if we were consistent. And we just need to spell out kind of what language and which direction we really want to use this. It's a great document. And to what standard do we want to hold that document?
Well, there's a difference between the land use plan and the zoning ordinance or zoning regulation.
Absolutely.
So legally speaking, the land use plan is intended to be a guide and a help guide those that pass the zoning ordinances or make variances or whatever. But the Supreme Court has said that a land use plan is separate from zoning ordinance and is a guiding document. So there really isn't a question there.
Well, I think the public's perception is that I think there is a conflict. I think there is an ambiguity about how powerful this plan is. And I think if there's something that we need to do to be more transparent with the public, I think we should do so.
Well, maybe the public needs to understand the process, how zoning gets affected, but this is the law of the land, it's statutory and it's case law.
Well, I agree with you, but it's
Key word.
you go ahead and
Vision. And then the guiding document. Vision. In other words, it's large, they would whole count, whole sector. The guiding document, what is more specific meaning? It's not, here's the thing, some of the things, there's a certain amount of specificity to it. People look at it, some more people interpret it as like, well, it's ABCD one. Right. So I think that's where it's struggled. I'm not a legal expert, I don't know legal things, but we're always going to have an application of it. It's a specific case. I don't think this is sort of a lot of, you know, thoughtful. I don't know how to make this plan or trying to get away from it so far. You know, got to center line where we're trying to go to that vision and then be responsible.
Yeah, I don't think that's different from what I said, though. I mean, I think your vision, it is your guiding document, but that is the plan, and it influences your zoning.
I was worried about where guiding was law, okay? Some specific connotation to that word.
I I think the key is the perception here. I think the perception is, and I don't necessarily think this is just the public. I think this is planning commission, board member, but I think the perception is wow, look at this awesome document that we have. This is it. This is the document that we're gonna hang our hat on. And I'm not necessarily sure when we worked on this document 3 years ago, we were, at least when I worked on the document 3 years ago, and I can only speak for myself, that it was never my intent for this to be the holy grail of documents. It was absolutely my intent for us to look at this document and apply it to every situation that we could possibly apply it to, and try to make better decisions with this document. But I think the perception is that we have this omnipresent document that is controlling some other things, and I think with some tweaks and some language, if everybody's on board with it, which we may not, but there's some language that Mark proposed a month or two ago that might help spell out a little bit the purpose of the document. Is that, again, all the policies are great policies in the document, and irrespective of what the TCA says and what some court action or court case says, I think we need to address it so the transparency is there when the public reads the document. Now, if they go through and cherry pick what they want to read, that could be a problem. But if the public reads the document and tries to say, okay, this is the purpose of this document, and this is designed so the folks that make the decisions, the staff, and the coordinator on the planning commission, and DRB to a certain degree, these folks that make these decisions that has to implement this document, they have to use this document to the best of their ability based upon the information that they have. But it is not the one document, again, I'm speaking for me, that says, all right, that is black or white, and if it doesn't mean that, then the whole thing is thrown out with the baby in the bathwater. So I guess that's kind of what my thought was. I don't think I'm alone in thinking this. We've had some struggles when we implemented the land, or I guess when we wrote the land use plan, and some situations we said, oh, the land use plan shouldn't apply here, but yet it did apply because we didn't think about a particular situation. But I think it really should give, I think the land use plan should have a little bit more flexibility in it. And again, this has no particular, I'm not referring to any one project or one zoning or rezoning. This has to do with trying to really understand what the intent of the land use plan was on day one, irrespective of what the Tennessee Code annotated and the court said. And I think we should just spell it out. And there's some things in there that have some conflicts with the subdivision regulations, maybe with the zoning ordinance. And I think in the really minor housekeeping things, really, except for the big summary of what this land use plan, its purpose is, I'm not sure there's a whole lot of tweaks that necessarily need to occur here. But there's a few little things that we've kind of come up and said, well, there's some conflict. There's been some connectivity things that we've looked at in the past that we said, well, maybe connectivity shouldn't apply under that situation. Well, we contemplate that in the land use plan.
Right.
Again, I think the land use plan should be a document that is once a year too much, maybe, but every couple of years, should we go back on it and say, okay, where are the conflicts being? Should we have some tweaks and have a public forum to discuss it? I think it makes sense. It's a living, breathing document, and it should be changed occasionally.
Well, and my point is simply that your explanation of how you envision language is in fact the legal explanation for
I think there's an area that needs to be clarified, that Mark pointed out on page 35. The intensity, I think, should coincide with.
I agree. I think there's a conflict, especially with multifamily and density, things that we've talked about. Right. We talked about possibly even creating a new, on the land use plan map, maybe even creating some other new density that is not on it today that might more accurately reflect maybe what the citizens want. We talked about whether it's more of a consistent living, lower density multifamily, or there's some things that's like, I think they're minor tweaks. I think these are healthy things. I think it's also good just to have to bring it back up to the surface and let's talk about it. And let's talk about all the good things. And if there's some bad things, let's talk about those things too.
One of the things I like to say is I don't know how many of you all who were not on the planning commission, board, mayor, and alderman participated at the time. But I think the people who participated at the time realized it was visionary, as we said. It's unfortunate that what we have a lot of times is people don't participate until it affects them. And then they come out. And one of the things we tried to stress when we were advertising and talking with people back a few years ago was come out and have that input now. Don't wait until it's a quote-unquote crisis to you. And so I think a lot of the people who really did get involved back then realized it's a map, literally, to what people would like to have, but it's not etched in stone. And there is flexibility. There's a guidance of such, but it's flexible. If it hadn't been that flexible, there'd be apartments being built now. But because there was a interest by the people around there, that was awful. So it's one of the things that I tell people when they come to me and complain about things is come to the meetings, know what's going on. And it certainly applies to the meetings that we had back in those times. But I've seen several people come since then and complain about things that we came up with at that point that didn't come to the meetings. So you're not here, your input's not going to be felt. And it all falls back on those of us who do come. And we try, but we can't. We don't know how everybody, we are representative, and that's the best we can do is be representative. And,
One thing that I might address, and I have about this guy, is that policy one. Talk about that.
Can't hear you, Mark.
Yeah,
Some of us people are old, we can't hear well.
yeah.
I think everybody's got to see God.
Right. No, I think it was policy one on page 5 in the plan is really key to what I think Noah was talking about, and that,
Are you gonna bring that up on the screen?
I don't know. We'll try. Departments. Well, what policy one says currently is all town decisions should, doesn't say shall. Ed made that point at the planning commission meeting in September. There's a big difference between should and shall. That's an important point. It says all town decisions should be consistent with the CLUP. If a proposed action or project is inconsistent, then either the action or project should be modified or the CLUP amended. That's, I think, key to what Noah is saying, that maybe that needs to be a little more clear. Something that I'd put in just as a draft, some draft language, and these are the kind of points that I need some feedback on as to whether you all do feel that policy one needs to be. I've stated something like land use decisions in the town should reference for guidance purposes the CLUP and other applicable town adopted documents. In terms of the CLUP, the objective would be to make decisions to the greatest extent possible that are consistent with the vision outlined in the strategies identified in the CLUP. Because that really describes what CLUP, in my view, really is, and that is it's a policy document. As I mentioned earlier, there's going to be times when there might be some things that are contradictory in it that would relate to a matter before the planning commission. There might be one element of the plan that would maybe steer your action in one way, and another element of the plan may give you some different guidance. That's when it's important to understand the role of the plan, that it is just that, it's just a guiding document. And there's going to be some things that are subjective about it. You know, what I think is really critical, and I keep saying this, is that you get to the is that you understand, you know, the vision of the plan. Let's just pull up some things here. I want to go to some of the
Mark, while you work on that, the policy one, the way I read it today, says that if the particular element of the plan is not consistent, I'm talking about proposed plan, is not consistent with the land use plan, then either the land use plan needs to be changed or the submitted plan needs to be changed. So right now, you don't really have the flexibility. If you read that policy one, you really don't have the flexibility to deviate from the plan without either A, bringing the submitted plan into compliance, or B, changing the land use plan. So I think policy one should be something we should, to me, that is the crux of this discussion, is what policy one should say.
I agree with that. Policy, I don't think, I would go the other extreme of what you're saying, and that is, policy one ought to be the law. That ought to be.
It's not, it can't be, that's not the law of the land, there's a statute, there's Tennessee Supreme Court decisions, and you have to follow the law of the land. You can't obfuscate that just because you don't want to.
My point is, that there's a lot of work that's gone into the plan. I don't think anybody argues with that. And there was a lot of development behind that. It's that the plan should exist so a transient board can't just come in and make a change. That there needs to be some kind of foundation. One of the things I think, as I look at the plan, one of the tenets, if you will, is protect existing neighborhoods. That's kind of something that goes all through it, to protect existing neighborhoods. Well, what does that mean? I think sometimes the plan starts to get too specific and starts talking, maybe, I can't think off the top of my head, so it starts talking about sidewalks, greenways, and things like that. That's starting to get down into minutia on protecting existing neighborhoods. But one thing would be like the density gradient. You don't want 100 people per square mile, or 100,000 people per square mile living next door to somebody that's 10 per square mile, or something like that. That's kind of the way I view this plan, the way that it ought to be. And then policy one, it should be somewhat, I know you're going to say it's not legal and all that, but there should be some teeth to it.
Well, the
Other part of that is that the town hands are bound in certain ways because there are certain rights already vested in certain landowners. And it's unlawful to make some changes. So, the town has to do what they can do under the law. And that isn't going to necessarily satisfy everybody and keep everything the way you want it to be. So you have to understand, sometimes the town's hands are entitlement.
Yeah, and that's good, and that's fine. And I understand that and appreciate that and agree with it. I don't want somebody, if I have a vested right of doing something with my land, I don't want somebody coming in after the fact saying, no, you can't do that, if in fact it's already legal for you to do. But I think that this vision, the plan says, what do we want Fairview to be? Do we want it to be a community of resident owners? Do we want it to be a transient community of renters? Do we want it to be a bedroom community? Do we want it to be a commercial center or whatever? And I think that's what the plan is trying to accomplish. So if you talk about some of the zoning things, I don't believe anybody just woke up one morning and said, hey, let's make this parcel R4, this one R1, this one R3, whatever. I'm sure there was some thought put into that, and for a reason, follow the plan. And so I think you want to be very careful when you start deviating from all of that work that went in. That's fine.
Mark, can I speak for a minute? Okay. My name is Mull Wyman. I live at 528 Wyndham Hall Lane. Little discussion about the plan, what it is and what it isn't. Okay. Right now, the plan is policy, it's guideline. Plan is not law. Planning Commission adopted the plan, December 20th, 2012. They certified the plan to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. However, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen did not, I emphasize, did not adopt the plan. If they had adopted the plan by ordinance, the plan would become law. Decisions that would be made either by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, would, by state law 13-4-201, would have to be consistent with the plan, land use decisions. If they're not, then the plan either would have to be changed or the applicant would have to be consistent. That's basically what we're saying. It's a guideline, it's policy, but if it's adopted, and you all adopted it December 20th, 2012, that means that for you it was policy, but it's a guideline. It's not the law. And unless and until it is adopted by the planning, these changes by the Planning Commission and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, it will continue to be a guideline, but your decisions will not have to be consistent with it. I think that really needs to be understood right at the front end. Okay?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, recently we did adopt the mixed-use town center portion of the land use plan by ordinance. The rest of the plan has only been accepted by resolution by the Planning Commission. So like Mull said, there's more flexibility, you know, in areas outside of the mixed-use town center. And you know, the land use plan is what it traditionally is in that regard, and that is it's a policy document that's used for general reference purposes.
Mark, can I ask, does that, with that in mind, do we really need to change the language of policy one? If we understand that it's a guiding document and not a regulatory.
Well, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, the existing language doesn't say shall, it says should. All town decisions should be consistent with the comprehensive land use plan. If it said shall, then I think you've got a different discussion. It does say should, but then it does say if the action is inconsistent with the plan, that either that action needs to be modified or the plan needs to be modified. That might need to be adjusted from my perspective. I think, you know, my assumption is that the plan is not going to be adopted by ordinance, the remainder of it, nor would I recommend that it be adopted by ordinance. I do think we did the right thing in adopting it by ordinance with the mixed-use town center because that's such a critically important strategy in our land use plan, and we needed, you know, that additional layer of protection for that area. So I think that was a good strategy. I think it would really be very cumbersome to deal with if we expanded that to adopt it town-wide. That's just my opinion. I think that there's some language probably in the plan that does need to be cleaned up, some areas where there are some inconsistencies. But I don't think the plan needs to be adopted by ordinance. And I don't know, but the policy one, I think, is something that if you all feel that you want me to try to revisit that a little bit and make that a little more clear, assuming that we're not adopting this by ordinance, which is my assumption, then I can work on that. That's the kind of information and productive discussion that I need tonight to know how you want me to proceed with addressing some of the issues that are in the plan. Something I think is important, just again to step back here, the heart of this plan, basically what happened was our consultants came in, that we had a lot of, discussion, public input. They saw some issues that Farragut faced, and that's what's on the screen there, which I think they're spot on at the staff level. I think all those things are accurate. And then what they did was they developed 8 strategies in the document to try to address those issues. That's really the heart of this plan. That is, the issues are kind of, the challenges that the town faces. The plan then kind of conveys a vision, and it gives you some strategies to help address that vision, and which consequently would address those issues. So I think everybody, needs to understand those 2 things, because those are real critical. If you go back to these issues, these properties were developed, there would be other ways of getting within subdivisions. You'd have other options, and you wouldn't be dumped out on a single street. So I think connectivity, I think they're very accurate with that. Some opportunities to capitalize on our heritage, we've been working on that. We purchased a Russell House. We definitely made some moves in that regard. They do point out that there is some limited opportunities for infill and expansion in the town. We've only got about 20% developable land left in the current town limits. They talk a little bit about annexation. Unfortunately, right now in the state law, the annexation is just really not an option. And that may change in the future, but it's really not an option right now. And then kind of a lack of a coherent image, trying to enhance our gateways into the town, trying to build a plan of development that is distinctively Farragut. We made some great advances toward that goal last year, or a few months ago, by adopting the architectural design standards. That's going to help us a lot with our built environment. We've already seen that with a number of site plans that have come before the Planning Commission, where prior to those standards, there would have been a very different type of development built than what we would ask the developer to do now. So all that can help with that image. So you've got those issues, and then, like I said, they developed some strategies to address those issues. And within those strategies in the document itself, it gets into more detail and more depth about what that might look like. This is just some different pages from the document, obviously not intended to be read, but it's just to show you kind of how they deal with these different strategies, like this one, strategy 4, increase connectivity, and they give you some objectives to try to aspire to when you have new developments coming before the commission. Those kinds of things that are within the document. So I think that, if policy 1 needs to be clarified, I think that's something that we can work on. I think another thing that, from just dealing with it from making recommendations at the staff level, would be some of the language in the plan that talks about transitions and flex density probably needs to be clarified a little bit better, because it describes, in some cases, a plan of development that's not allowed in the town currently in our regulatory scheme. So, that's the disconnect I was talking about earlier, that I think there is some disconnect. I'm not saying you need an overhaul by any means, but I do think there's some things in there that, where there needs to be, those two things brought together a little closer. Does anybody else have anything you want to add to that? Yeah, Ron?
Issue 3 was about offering different housing choices.
Yeah.
And I think the goal of Mixed Use Town 7 was to offer different housing choices to apartments and condos that would be creating a pedestrian-friendly community, downtown community, where we would have more density, but more people walking and less traffic, less automobile traffic. So I think that's a real key part of issues that have come up recently. And I think Mixed Use Town 7 is going to address that. So I want to make sure everybody understands that we are looking for more apartments that in that location.
Yeah, the mixed-use town center can address potentially a few of these items, actually. The image, the infill a little bit, I mean, really, even the heritage to some extent, capitalizing on whatever happens around the Russell House property could be important. So, yeah, that's a good point. So, Mike?
I just want to bring up the point, having talked and argued these issues in front of the FMPC and the WOMA vote. Actually, I think in the situation that I dealt with, and I think the plan worked as it was supposed to work, as it was designed to work. I tied those arguments together, and I tied the argument of consistency with 4, 5, 6 different areas of the plan that I showed inconsistency with a proposed development or proposed rezoning. And the FMPC looked at that. The developer went back and made modifications to their plan, and we came back and discussed again. The FMPC listened to it, and the FMPC voted twice the same way. So I argued that what is in the plan is good. I've submitted some changes that our group has recommended based on discussions. For example, there was a large discussion in September, I think it was September FMPC meeting, about the Heron Road development for an assisted living facility, and is that commercial, residential, institutional? I see that as being something that needs to be cleared up. So the other thing I want to put out 2 cautions, and I said this in front of the FMPC and Bowman. This comes from my background of where I've lived. The first is, if we decide that there needs to be a change to policy 1, that's a major update to the plan, and as called for in the plan, that's going to require substantial public outreach. I'm not trying to dissuade anybody. I'm just saying, as much as we're sitting in this room, this isn't just about us sitting in this room, it's about the whole public community of Farragut needs to, in some forum, some way, understand what those changes are and what that means to a change in the plan. The second thing, and again, I know I've said this in front of everybody, I am really concerned as a citizen of this town about variance, because variance leads to treating individual applicants differently, and when you do that and you make decisions based on those variances and those differences in the way you're reading the plan at that point in time, or this development in this location versus that location, my concern coming out of the great state of California is at some point this town is going to deny some development for some developer based on it's not consistent with the plan. And I brought this issue up with the Heron Road development, and one of the gentlemen at the meeting brought this up. The issue becomes, why is this developer treated differently than that developer? If essentially they had the same issue, it was 2 different pieces of property. And if those two developers look differently, folks, we're not gonna be in Chancery Court. This town's gonna be in federal court with a discrimination lawsuit. And that's why those of us on the other side of this are saying codification is a way to protect this town because everybody sees it the same way. This board, the FMPC Commission, did that discussion on the Heron Road issue for 2 hours the night in September probably. How much of that discussion would not have been required if those people that were bringing that issue to the table understood, codified, and law that you can't put R6 zoning next to R2 zoning because that's codified in the law. That's how we won the Smith Road issue. Because you have it in the R6 zoning ordinance that the developer's site plan has to be consistent with the plan. And we argued that point. So we brought that back around. I just want everyone to understand that those of us that are in the town that are looking at these issues are concerned about what's happening. You know, we don't begrudge landowners to develop their land. All we're asking is that there was a plan put in place of what that development would look like, that we wouldn't expect to have somebody living in R2 next to R6, that there would be some transition. And that's why those things are up here. So from my perspective, in totality, if you look at the plan as a whole, holistically, it makes sense to me. As Mark has said, there's some tweaks. As Commissioner Myers has said, there's some tweaks. Do we need a high-density land use description and realignment of the zoning codes? We probably do. That would help with the transition policy because then you could look at a piece of property and say, okay, we have 60 acres here. Let's use Mr. Ford's property in the town center as an example. The front 20 acres could be commercial. We could go to R6, and then the back 20 acres could be something of the less density. And that's the plan. Certain pieces of property that are currently listed as medium density residential, the shape of the land just doesn't allow for that. Unless you're going to have little strips of housing backed up on each other that no developer can make sense out of. So I think in totality, there's a lot of good things in this plan and there's some tweaks that need to happen. But I would caution if policy one's on the table, then as a homeowner and as a resident, that's something that needs to go back out to the town itself and say, whatever that forum looks like, does this make sense to everybody? What the changes are is just too significant, and what do the homeowners and the residents of the town of Farragut, think of that? So that's kind of my comments from having been involved.
Anybody else? Planning Commissioner, go ahead.
I'm Roseanne Powell, but I'm a resident of the Court. And I just want to verify a comment by Ms. Holiday about the participation of folks. I moved here in 2008, and obviously I was here for some of the reviews that I didn't get involved in. I'm one of those, Ms. Holiday, that you were talking about, that got involved when I was personally affected by it. And I think that probably should be the case for the overwhelming majority of residents of Farragut, unfortunately, because a lot of them just do not understand all the process was going on. And even if they came to the meetings, they would be lost. Whatever. They remember the analysis made. But the second point I wanted to make is that when I am personally making decisions, major decisions, I use a pro and con sheet. I put down the pros of doing this and the cons of doing this, and weigh it. And that policy one is particularly the major thing here that I think is going to affect our tweaks and all the rest of the things. And that we should sit down and seriously list what are the pros of doing or changing it one way and the cons of another, and so forth, and see where we come out. The one pro that I think of right off the top of my head is that it provides some assurance or certainty to a certain extent for the residents of Farragut, for the
developers and for the landowners as to what any FMPC is going to look at or BMA is going to look at and consider when they make decisions. If they waver from their document, then they have to explain why they're wavering in very clear terms so that you avoid the situation that Mike just talked about, of treating one developer one way for some unknown reason and another way, without explanation as to why you're doing it. So that's just, I'm not going to belabor the point. I think you see what I'm talking about pros and cons, and I think we can sit down and do that. Thank you.
The thing about policy one is we've already been doing that, requiring people when they come in and they want to deviate from what we've set as our future land use plan. We're requiring them to, at first, make application to change the land use plan before they can change their zoning. Of course, that comes from the landowner themselves, but we've already required that. So I guess that's what I'm kind of stuck on, is that we're already living by policy, at least from the landowner's perspective.
Yeah. Well, I'm, you know, that's what I wanted to get feedback on is, and maybe just tonight's discussion can just be about policy one. I think that's very important. But it,
Well, and I guess my further question is, if we change policy one, will we still require them to apply to,
change the plan.
yeah.
Well, that's something that needs to be thought of. You know, that,
And another thing about the transitions, I think what's difficult about the transitions is we don't have zonings
yeah.
in our zoning, so it's either we need to alter the transition language or
Yeah.
we need to alter our zoning language. And something about altering zoning language leads to very long meetings in my.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point, and that's what we ran into with a couple of things that's come before the Planning Commission is the plan clearly talks about, as you all mentioned, protection of existing residents, and that transition concept is key to that. But we don't really have, and I think I mentioned this in September, we don't have a zoning district that within the same development allows for transition. I mean, and if that's something that, you know, I think if we're going to leave that language in the plan, then we do need to revisit our zoning in order to be able to provide for that.
And I think it was Commissioner Myers that used the term feathering, which is another.
Yeah, and that's in the
similar
plan.
concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that under certain circumstances, I think you should be able to, in lieu of a feathering, be able to dedicate additional open space. Or something else that we had talked about. There was never a vehicle in the land use plan that actually allows that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the transition topic is something that I've, at a staff level, had some, you know, discomfort with, but I think it does need to be, you maybe like Noah said, give it a little more flexibility. The transition can be, it can be form-based kind of transition, and or it could be, you know, maybe greater open space, you know, provisions of pocket parks between developments, or some kind of, you know, soft transition, you know, between uses that may not be traditionally viewed as, you know, compatible with each other. So there's different ways of doing that. I think something that I would like to point out at the staff level is, instead of kind of having this buffer concept, I'd almost rather have a transitional type concept. Buffering, we've had buffer strips throughout the history of the town, and they certainly serve a purpose. But in some cases, they do a very poor job of building a larger community. And what I think we need to think about are transitional type of concepts rather than buffering. And that could be done by having, you know, compatible type of forms of development that abut, you know, compatible types of development. Like, for example, if somebody were developing a large piece of property that abutted single-family residential, you know, have something in our zoning that would allow them to, you know, have the opportunity to have single-family type units around the perimeter to transition to what's against them. And then as you work your way further away from those existing developments, it would be a more intense type use. That, I think, is pretty much what the transition concept in the plan is talking about. But like Louise mentioned, we don't have a zoning district that allows for that right now. I think that's one of my assumptions that I mentioned earlier. There is some disconnect between the plan and the regulations that we have in place, and I think that does need to be addressed. And maybe a high-density residential district is something that, you know, may modify the medium density is things that could aid in that transitional concept.
The location that the people who put this together came from has exactly that concept in their community. They have there was a large piece of property that was a driving vehicle that was developed. And on the outside of that property, and they look more like condos than offices, but they have offices that are on the major streets. And then on another one of them, that's two sides of it. On the third side of it are small businesses. It's in Boulder, Colorado. And the next area in from that is condos. And they're 1- and 2-story condo buildings. There's a large area in the middle that's open space, and then from the open space on to the edge of the property are single-family homes. So they certainly familiar with that type of setting because their offices happen to be in one of those buildings on the outside of the property. But that's a great example of the feathering. And they've taken into consideration the business, the younger people. I know it happened to be in the area where my son lived, and he certainly couldn't afford a home, but he and his wife were able to afford a condominium. So they had the condos, and then they had the single-family homes.
And it was probably all integrated.
It was.
And I think that's key. Another thing that the plan talks about is that we do need to have developments, and those that have transitional components can do this because there's not this perception of they need to be separated from us. If there's proper transition, whether it's in form or by some type of open space, there's more, you know, potential for interconnectivity and more community building instead of just somebody coming in and fencing off a piece of property and being barricaded from everything that's around them. That, I think, is something that the plan would speak very strongly against. So if there's some things that we need to revisit in our zoning ordinance that starts moving us toward allowing for these type of transitional developments, and we need to think about it. You know, it's one thing when you got enough land to be able to do it in form and maybe naturally, but then you also need to think about how you're going to do that on a smaller piece of property like the Heron Road property. You know, if you're going to put an assisted living facility there, how are you going to properly transition from that to Cottage Creek? And still have an integration between the two. I think it can be done, but that may require maybe allowing the building to be the front setback, for example, for the building could be relaxed and it could be moved up closer to Campbell Station Road, and allowing you to have more, in that particular property, more open space between their development and, you know, the residential development to the east. Things like that, you know, I think, you know, we need to probably look at.
Is it something that can be added to our current zoning, or would we have to, have a new zoning district? Correct.
It could be a little bit of both. Could be a little bit of both.
Like
You know,
either or?
We've talked about trying to create a civic institutional district. You could build in that some language that would hopefully address larger parcels and smaller developments, and build some of those concepts into that match the plan, so that when somebody comes before the planning commission, the commission is more comfortable in reviewing that request, because what they're presenting is something that reflects the plan, because they've been allowed to do it by our zoning. So if you all feel that that's something that, and that's what I'm trying to get tonight, is to give me some guidance on some of the key things that maybe we should try to work on. We can present some things back to you. Obviously, this is not going to be a short process. It's going to take some time. But if you all think that's important, then, you know, we can begin working on that. Yep.
Okay, along that line, I personally would not change, honestly. I like it the way it is. I think it works.
Okay.
I think that it works. Second thing, I do think that there needs to be maybe additional zoning, or additional zones. If you look at R1, R2, R3, R4, they get kind of muddled at times. Well, not R1, but 2, 3, and 4 start to look kind of similar in a lot of respect. R6 suddenly encompasses the whole world. You can go from 6 to 12, and that is a huge. If you've ever actually seen the difference between 6 and 12, you've always seen the bluff and drinking that. You know, it's tremendous. And I think one of the things Mike may have been saying is to have additional levels in there, maybe high density. Something to split up R6. Anyway, that would be a recommendation. It's further divide R6.
How do y'all feel about that? Dealing with the medium density residential as it's currently classified, and maybe separating it out into a medium, more transitional kind of district that may include attached single family and small apartments, as really the way it's described in the plan. And then have a higher density for something that may transition from medium density to, you know, a commercial or a mixed use type development. Does that, y'all think that?
I'm very supportive of that. I think we've always envisioned that higher densities and 12 units per acre when we talk about apartments. I've always been uncomfortable with some of the areas where we have what's considered high density. I don't see how we do it. I don't see how you put 12 units per acre somewhere. When they talk about somewhere in the plan, it's about the medium density residential is supposed to average 6 to 12 units per acre, should average to 9 units per acre. And when we were talking about that, the Horn property, I didn't see how we got to 9 units per acre with having single family homes, and I just didn't see how we were going to accomplish that. I just thought that was a little too high for the residential, what we consider a residential area, that a higher density apartments really belong close to the highway or in our mixed-use town center.
Anybody else have anything? Yeah.
One related topic that baffles me to this day, and that is the role of the conceptual plan that the developer submits to the application for rezoning. And it's growing, and after a rezoning decision is made. I remember one comment by a commissioner regarding the Horn property that once it was rezoned R6, then a developer could willy-nilly change it to anything that would comply with the R6 zone.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't seem to make sense. But I don't find anything in the plan that references the road of that plan as submitted in the application
Yeah.
after the rezone.
Yeah, that's the thing with most rezones, unless it's the town center district, we don't require a concept plan. They did submit one just to help show some things they were trying to work with the neighborhoods with, you know, the buffering and placement of buildings, which from their perspective, you know, was useful. But somebody could have taken that and totally done something different and built 12 units per acre and put the buildings, as long as they met the physical requirements of the R6 zoning district, then you're right. I mean, the concept plan wouldn't really be all that useful. Nor do I think we should get in a frequent situation where we're conditioning things. That's just not good policy. We need to, if we've got those kinds of problems coming up, we need to revisit our legislative, we need to change some ordinances so that we're not faced with that.
But Mark, isn't that basically the way it is in all towns?
Yeah, I think every town is going through the same questions that we are. I mean, the good thing about our town is we are talking about these things. I think that's great, because so many places, including where I was at before I came to Farragut, they have this land use plan that gets prepared, and then it just sits on the shelf, and hardly anybody ever uses it. So the good thing about it is we are talking about it tonight, and we are using it actively in the town. So that's, you know, that's a very good result, I think. But does anybody else have any questions or comments? Yeah,
Back to
Don.
policy one.
Yeah.
You're gonna need some consensus from a staff perspective. of what-
Yeah, I've heard a little of both.
Policy one, going back to 2012 and the results of many months of meetings and a lot of feedback and surveys, I really don't think policy one, the way it is written today, truly embodies as well as it could the intent of what we came out of those meetings in 2012. So with that said, I do think some changes to policy one is warranted.
Is that generally consensus? I know
I guess-
you're
I like policy one the way it is. You want to see, you're going to need some
Yeah, maybe
guidance,
just
so whether just
who wants to see policy adjusted?
I like to see it. I think that's.
What's the
Suggestions.
Yeah,
I
we
like
can-
a better understanding
Yeah.
of what's
Can I ask,
that it bothers me.
Yeah, I can put together some things in maybe next planning commission meeting and just show existing language and maybe here's some proposed modifications, 2 or 3 alternatives, and just see, you know, get some reaction to that. I think it's hard to really say what you want to do at this point, because it's all just kind of hypothetical. But if I can put something out there for you to react to, maybe that would help.
What's kind of the pro and con was?
Yeah, pro and con, yeah,
Hey Noah,
yeah.
address my concern about how we've been proceeding so far, where the requirements come in and, how would you address
What
that?
you're more specifically talking about is a rezoning. And when somebody comes in for a rezoning, absolutely, we're requiring for them, if it's not compatible with the land use plan, you gotta go through a process to change the land use plan. But there's a lot of things that get into the strategies of the land use plan that we are not making necessarily them change the land, us do a collective change in the land use plan or the applicant. There's been, the car wash was an example where you had a big blue banner in Tanoa. It was contrary to the land use plan, and the planning commission all outvoted me, which is fine. And so in one, we didn't change the land use plan, we didn't make the applicant change. We felt like that exactly what we had talked about with the land use plan, we're supposed to interpret the land use plan and do the best that we can. The land use plan felt like that what the applicant had provided was appropriate, maybe not word for word consistent with the land use plan. And so the second sentence of policy 1 about that particular change, what you're talking about, is the part that gives me heartburn. So either we're gonna hold it all the way to the standard and we are gonna make, by God, if there's a change and it doesn't comply, then we gotta change the land use plan or make the applicant change. Or we are gonna go back to what we said in 2012, which is, hey, this is a guide, we're gonna do the best that we can, we're gonna make the best decisions with this, and if it is not compatible, we're gonna say, hey, it's not particularly compatible, but yet it still meets the intent of the ordinance, it's still good for the community, or X, Y, Z, or whatever, we're gonna say, no, we don't like it, because there's too many homeowners that are against it. And so, and for whatever reason, it's in the land use plan, but I think that policy, we have not consistently followed that policy in the last couple of years that we've had the land use plan. And so that's why I think that the policy's not a flawed policy. I just don't necessarily think that it says exactly what we intended for it to say.
I have very mixed, because I agree with what you're saying. I understand, I'm having a difficult time with this one, because I get, this is a guideline for us. There's a vision here that's what we're supposed to be concentrating on. And this policy 1 seems to have pigeonholed us in a certain direction and we're losing sight of the vision of that this was supposed to provide us. And that's where I struggle. And then we have some precedent where we've set, where we require people to come in and change the land use plan. So I guess I'm in a, I'd like to see some language,
But
because
again,
I'm struggling.
The only time we're really making them change the land use plan is only at the rezoning phase.
Yes.
If it has to do with a particular strategy, or there was a neighborhood that who didn't want to connect with the other neighborhood over on Turkey Creek, and we said, oh, don't worry about connecting. Well, it was contrary to the land use plan.
You're correct.
And we didn't change the land use plan, and so I think that there's some language in there, and we never intended to change the land use plan. We did this back in 2012, and again, according to the Tennessee Code annotated about what a land use plan is supposed to be. I think it would help the public, and maybe folks that aren't as familiar with the land use plan or the intent of the land. Intent is such a bad word. The land use plan should stand on its own. We shouldn't have to worry about what the intent is and what the intent isn't. It either is or isn't, and so if we can focus on, all right, what is the role of the land use plan, and let's spell it out in policy 1. That way, whether it's a new planning commissioner or a new resident of the town of Farragut, or an old resident of the town of Farragut that just never read the land use plan, it's real self-explanatory, and you go, okay, this is what the purpose of this document is. And that's where I think policy 1 could use
So I'll put together.
Go to one extreme of making it just a guideline, you can deviate from it with, or if you, as a particular planning commission envisions or votes to deviate, then you have the con of the next planning commission may differ in another situation. You've got possible inconsistencies from commission to commission, as well as from interpretations.
I agree with Roseanne. If we're not going to use the document, we should never have the document to begin with. So I really do think it is a very important document. And when we do deviate from the document, I think we should have real good reason that's in the minutes of why we deviated from the document.
Yeah, I agree with
You know,
that.
it comes down to, and I think there's one thing, and you touched on it, about something that involves rezoning and something that doesn't involve rezoning. And I think they're two very different things. I think that the rezoning bar should be very high, so that we don't have, like I said, a transient board. They're very temporary, they're here for a short period of time, and they're gone, and you have no board committee. But that rezone stays forever, you know? So that's why I think that bar needs to be high. Now, the other bar may be quite a bit lower. You know, it's like, I think the plan worked well on the Smith Road property. You had the applicant say why it was consistent with the plan, and then we had Mike get up and say why it was inconsistent with the plan, and the board sat and doodled on it and said, voted the way they voted. I think it worked in that case. But back to what I'm saying is, I do think that there ought to be some discrimination between a zoning change and just use within the zone. If that makes
Now,
sense.
but we do that today. We have that, there's a difference between what we talked about when somebody has a zoning change, and then that does, if it's not compatible with land use plan, that does require a whole nother agenda item, a workshop and a vote to be able to change the land use
And you can
plan.
put that in policy one. You can say if it has to do with zoning.
He's exactly right. I mean, you could, if that is the goal, and that's kind of been my
That's
goal all
my goal.
along, that could be in policy one, that spells out, and I don't know how to wordsmith it, Mark, I'm sorry, you have to get somebody smarter than I am to figure out how to wordsmith that, but but you could spell out when it's not compatible, when the particular zoning is not compatible with land use plan, that requires a change. The individual strategies, and there may be some other things that don't directly have to do with the map, then those are things that don't necessarily require a change in land use plan. Is that addressed?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
I got a like kind of problem here. I don't see policy in this strategies.
Policy 1 is on page 5. There's 3 policies on page 5 there on that screen. That's page 5 of the plan. Then there's policy 4 deeper in the document that talks about the flex density and those kinds of things.
I mean, to me, the policies override the strategies. The policies should have a hierarchy that is
Yeah,
more powerful.
I agree.
I'm not finding the right word, but more important than the strategies. They're all important.
Yeah.
But to me, the policies are the ones that,
Yeah, you're right. I think you're right. Well, I guess, yeah.
Policy 4, where is that? Sorry.
It is, it's on page, I don't remember right offhand.
There it is, page 22.
22.
Mark, are you planning on having another workshop before it's taken to that?
Well, what I could do is, I could present policy 1, I think, at a planning commission meeting, because that shouldn't, I think we do need to have some clear direction on that. I think I've gotten enough feedback to know that you also, and this is not going to happen overnight, it takes time, but we need to look at our zoning ordinance and try to build some transitional concepts in there, I think, so that, like I said earlier, there's the decision makers aren't placed in as awkward position because they're trying to apply the plan, but the regulatory scheme is really not letting them do that. So I think I need to, I can also start working on that, but maybe for the next planning commission meeting, just really kind of get some clear direction from you all on this policy 1, because like Noah said, I think that's in the hierarchy, it's right at the top, because it really, kind of steers everything else in the plan.
as we're working through this, and this is something we can deal with in the spring, but I do think there are some things in the map, and I'm guilty of not spending as much time looking at the land use plan map when we approved it. But there are some things now that I look at, and I'm like, oh my, what were we thinking? Mostly it has to do with medium density and on some roads that maybe didn't make the most sense, Virtue Road being one of them.
Yeah.
Now, Virtue Road, I don't know if it's going to be done in my lifetime or not, may get improved, and then we may look at it differently, but I do think there are some things that are some map changes that we may want to also look at.
Yeah. Okay.
Mark, I'd make one recommendation.
All right. Yep.
In looking at policy 4, it speaks a little bit to density, higher density and the relative range. There may be an option on transitions to talk in there about transitioning within a specific piece of property, where you match, or you try to match closely, R2 to R3, R4, R6 in commercial. I don't know if there's some language that could be tagged in. That seems like it might be a good place to put a little language about how to transition density through a piece of property as well as your green space ideas, et cetera, so.
Okay, good.
Yeah, because it talks about base density there, which is also another issue that we faced that's pretty specific to
Yeah.
the plan.
Yeah, that's another area that we've had a little bit of disconnect between the plan and our regulatory, documents that we have in place, so.
In talking about those densities, weren't we thinking about maybe doing a 6 to 9 and a 9 to 12? Is that kind of what the direction we kind of?
4 to 8.
Yeah, I had 4 to 8
12.
and 9 to 12, but that's just for discussion,
Okay.
that's one potential transition element. Or you could maybe do something, and another thing is that you may build a zoning district that this would probably only apply to larger tracts, but it'd almost be like a planned unit development, whereas you got the kind of flexibility to allow for detached structures around the perimeter, and then as you work your way inward, some, more larger facility, so that you have a form kind of transition in that context.
I think that's a good avenue for pieces like the Horn property or some of these other large vacant properties to, if there was a conceptual site plan up front that this would be townhomes next to neighborhoods, this over here would be, an R6 type property, this over here would be, well, it could be R6 right now for another type of assisted living facility, or if there's going to be a separate zoning code for assisted living, elderly housing, whatever you want to call that. I don't know legally under the ordinances, I guess that's a planned unit development, but I haven't read the ordinance to see if that's something conceptually that can be brought into the town. Because my thought train is if you're gonna do that, if a developer brought that in and said, I have this 80 acres, I want this piece up here to be R3 next to this neighborhood, and then I wanna do R6 over here, and maybe I wanna change this commercial down on this corner, then can the town go in and say, okay, one fell swoop, we're gonna rezone that property to meet that planned unit development. And so, because I as a neighbor to that property would wanna know, okay, well, that's R6 down there, but I know what's next to me now has been rezoned R3. I'm good with that. I'm comfortable with that. It's as Roseanne said earlier, you say you wanna bring in an assisted living facility, let's use the apartments up on North Campbell Station. Has anything happened with them? We rezoned that property to R6. Nobody complained about it, but if they were coming in at 9 units an acre and that's what they presented, they may have somebody in the wings that's gathered money to close that deal that wants to come in at 12. And that may be, a challenge for the local landowners around that, the property owners around that. So I think particularly as Commissioner Myers was saying, if you do that high density, I think that gives you a lot more flexibility how you transition a piece of property with those different zoning codes. That's ordinance. We get away from the plan per se, and we say, okay, here's the plan for this piece of property in totality. Let's go ahead and rezone it. And I don't know how developers would feel about that if they came in with that, perspective. But I think as a homeowner, I think the residents would feel more comfortable knowing what property is next to them. But if you rezone one R6 and you still have a big plot of R2 sitting next to it, well, what homeowners think, well, once that gets rezoned R6, it's much easier for the town to rezone this other piece of property next to it, R6.
But it's already zoned. What are you talking about when you zone?
Well, because, for example, say the Horn property. That property is currently zoned R2 and R1. R1 and R2.
That's not what it says.
Yeah, that's what it's zoning.
That's what it's zoned. The plan just shows what the proposed density would be. So, I think, I don't know how planned unit development works, if that's within our ordinance code.
Yeah, that can be something we look into. They can get abused, and they can be kind of a long-term enforcement nightmare.
Right.
But that's certainly something that a lot of communities use.
Master community.
When I went to the conference in Seattle, the planning conference, they certainly are trying to stray away from planned unit developments now. They're basically, they've seen a lot of those just abused, and you get these municipalities who are trying to figure out, the different intricacies that were associated with each separate development that came through that municipality, and it's really very difficult to enforce. So hopefully we can, avoid that and craft some language like we did through the R6 process. We had a lot of creative things, I think, that came out of that, like placement of building in relation to parking lot and, buffering and all that. So hopefully we can, craft some language. It's not going to happen overnight. I think, I can probably get something for policy 1 to talk about at the next planning commission meeting, and I can be working on some of these other zoning ordinance amendments, just to throw out some things for you all to react to, but those may come after the first of the year. But I do think the policy 1, is something that we could try to present to you next time in December. So that's pretty much all that I have tonight, because I didn't want to go more than 90 minutes. And certainly if you all think of something you want to email me, just feel free to do that. Some points that maybe didn't get discussed tonight that you think are critical, just feel free to email me at any time, and I can take those into consideration. I'll try to put something together on policy 1, and I'll let you all react to that, and then we'll be working on those transitional concepts as well in policy 4.
So you think policy 1 for the December planning commission meeting?
Yeah, I should be able to do some different options for that. I've already kind of written one draft version, maybe just tweak that a little bit, maybe another option that addresses that. Yeah. 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 And that may be the way we go. Yeah. The town's always been, I don't know how much y'all know about zoning, but we've always been heavy Euclidean type zoning, and it's just separation of uses, very, you're kind of in this area, you're here, we're not supposed to be. And that's probably the case with most communities, frankly. But in planning, over the past decade or so, there's been, and really longer than that, there's been movement toward looking at the form of development rather than the uses per se, and trying to provide for form-compatible transition. And that's something that maybe, we need to look at a little bit on down the road. And that might be part of our discussion when we get further into the transitional concept discussion.
What is that called?
Well, form-based codes is one way, and basically the idea of that is to deal with form compatibility as you transition from different transects. You go from well, I'm sure probably Franklin has got some of that. I'm not sure about Brentwood. It's something that is pretty common, especially,
We have it down for our TCD.
yeah,
And if you look at that, that's a great example.
yeah,
Of that form-based code that we already have today.
Yeah.
It's only specific to a relatively small.
Yeah, that's
core of
right.
the town of Farragut.
yeah. Yeah, that is a kind of a hybrid of form-based codes, yeah, that's true. And a lot of the things that are in our architectural design standards would complement that.
I guess that's all good.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting how if you look back in history, in the 50s when suburbs started popping up, that was the thing, and that's what everybody wanted. You have 6-lane streets and everything, but it's changing. And it's hard to put a town that was developed into one line of thinking into a new line of thinking. And I don't think by any means Farragut is the only town that has those problems. it's, you know, walkability is just not something that the town of Perryman's forms is in vogue, I guess you might say.
Yeah, you can have integration in Euclidean zoning. I mean, we've got it in Farragut with walking trails in particular. So, I mean, you can have that. It's not, they're not mutually exclusive, but that form base may be something, especially if we maybe developed a mixed-use neighborhood type zoning district, which we don't currently have. That may be a good candidate for a pilot program of form-based codes. That, I don't know, that may be something I get time to do early next year, I'm not sure. But I think you've given me some things to work on, and I appreciate everybody's feedback tonight. And sorry about the technical difficulties early on there.